Welcome back to the Deep 404. This is just going to be a brief video to talk a little bit about what is happening in the United States on the southern border. The border with Mexico is so important to what is happening both in Israel, Middle East, and perhaps even more so to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. For those of you who are not aware, the connection may not be obvious. It's a bit of a map here, so we can have a look at where we're talking about. So the southern border of the United States is the border across Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and a section of California, and where that borders on Mexico. The total distance, roughly, of this border is about 2,500 kilometres, 2,400 kilometres, something like that, roughly. Along this border, there are multiple designated checkpoints for enabling the transfer from Mexico into the United States and the reverse, to travel from the United States into Mexico. And tens of thousands of people do this every day, legitimately, using passports, traveling between the countries. Both Americans, Mexicans, and tourists from both nations. This happens. The conflict, the challenge of what's going on at the moment, and what is having an impact in Ukraine and Israel, is related not to the legal transfer backwards and forth, and not the legal immigration of people who are immigrating into the United States and following the United States processes for that, where they will apply for the ability to enter the United States, arrive at a checkpoint, and then follow whatever US processing there is for receiving entry into the United States. There's about 2,000, probably 2,000 or more people per day who are following that method, turning up, looking for residency and citizenship, and applying and following that means. That's all fine and not part of the problem. But the problem that is emerging in the United States, and which is dividing the Republicans and the Democrats at the moment, is the between 5,000 and 10,000 people per day who are entering the United States through Mexico, who are not following that process, who are possibly being arrested and intercepted because they are entering areas illegally, or in many cases, those people are just making it across the border and there is no interception of them, there is no stopping or tracking of them, they just enter the United States. Obviously, some people in the United States have concern about this. They don't know who is coming into the country. They don't know why they're coming into the country. They don't know what their intentions are once they've entered the country. There are concerns about people introducing, reportable, controllable diseases like smallpox or tuberculosis. There is concerns that other nations unfriendly to the United States, might be using this as an avenue to insert their, perhaps even their military forces, military capable or trained personnel into the United States to ultimately wage some sort of terrorist activity or insurgency activity within the United States. Now, I know this kind of sounds like some big, spy novel, but it's not. There are already recorded cases where people have made their way into the United States via these means, and those people were already on criminal watch lists. Now, this might be from gang members who are moving up from Mexico looking to establish connections within the United States to better enable the flow of drugs up through Mexico. Or it might be people from nations, as I say, who are unfriendly nations for the United States and are on some sort of terrorist or military watch list already. So these things are happening already. The numbers are large. As I say, it's between 5,000 and 10,000, sometimes over 10,000 people a day, and those numbers seem to be growing. the people who are traveling into the United States aren't just from Mexico. This isn't just Mexican people traveling to the United States without following the immigration processes. There are, perhaps I think, two of the largest growing areas are the Middle East, people from the Middle East, and people from Africa travelling into the United States via this undocumented route. There are also large numbers of people from China travelling through this route, undocumented. Now, people are coming for various reasons, of course, some of them seeking asylum, others, who knows. And this is the concern about the security of the nation and the border, but it rolls into a political challenge or political fight now. And this is how we start to get to the impact this has on Israel and Ukraine. The conservative Republican Party are all for immigration, but they want it to be controlled and measured. They want to be able to determine who is coming into the country and stop the undocumented or illegal, as it's considered by the United States, immigration of people who turn up unannounced or sneak through the border and arrive and then move into areas of the United States, and no one knows where they are or what they've gone or what their plans are. The Democratic Party, on the other side of the political spectrum in the United States, have far less concern about the illegal entry into the United States. And the reason being, the core reason is that the Democratic Party see this migration of undocumented people into the United States as a means of growing the voter base for the Democratic Party by establishing things like sanctuary cities where people can travel to freely after they have made it into the country, by reducing or restricting the numbers of people who are captured and are then deported back to Mexico. Reports are that deportations have been reduced dramatically over the last 2 years through the Biden presidency, and that in some areas they are starting up again now. And that's quite possibly because right now Joe Biden has been pushed politically to a point where he needs to be seen to be doing something on this topic of border security. Now, you'll remember during Trump's tenure as president, he talked a lot about this, and he wanted to build a wall, and he wanted Mexico to pay for the wall. And he started an activity, of getting funding to be able to build that wall. And it was, of course, all over the mainstream press that this was terrible, this was draconian, this was cruel, what he was doing. But the reason that Trump was doing it, Trump being a Republican, was because there is strong support in the Republican base to build a wall and to secure the southern border. And on the Democratic side, there is a desire to let people through, because once they travel into the United States, the Democrats are working towards policies now that would gain or give and grant citizenship to these people who have made it in via undocumented or illegal means. Dick Durbin, a Democratic senator, has spoken of how he would support a bill where if you were an undocumented migrant within the United States and you decided to go and join the United States military, that you would then be granted US citizenship. So this would be what's considered a backdoor to US citizenship. You sneak into the country undocumented, then say you'll join the armed forces, and then you're given citizenship. Now, for people where that would occur, you would imagine that they would possibly, quite likely, tend to vote for the party that enabled them to do that, to be able to follow that route to American citizenship. Having American citizenship conveys a lot of benefits on you around the world, and the standard of living in general in the United States is higher than some of the countries where people are travelling from to get into the United States. So if you are the party that says, we'll let you come in, we won't build a wall, just come in and we will then find a way to give you citizenship, then you are likely to vote for those people. Now, There are estimates that during Biden's first term, his 4 years, the number of people that may enter the country illegally like this may get to a level of somewhere near 12 million people. 12 million people, if the bulk of them are going to vote for you, is obviously a sound political approach. And this is why Biden doesn't want to close down the wall, or close down the border. You might ask the question, well, how can these people vote for Biden if they're not American citizens? Well, here's a loophole. In some states in the United States, in order to vote, all you have to do is declare or swear that you are an American citizen. So even though you may not be an American citizen, you declare that you are, you can then register to vote and you can vote. Now, if you have millions of people who can't legally vote because they are not American citizens, but they would like to vote for the party that will give them citizenship in the future, is talking about that if they join the army, perhaps, then it might be relatively easy to convince some of these people to take the risk and say, yes, I am a citizen, I'm eligible to vote. Now, they don't have to prove that they're a citizen. This is the loophole. They just have to declare that they are. Yes, if it's found out that they've been fraudulent about that, there may be some penalties. But if you have millions of people doing this, then the likelihood that you'll get caught is small. There are limited resources to follow these things up. There are even, in terms of people who are travelling illegally across the border and are caught with drugs, if those amounts of drugs, even if they are considered to be for supply, are small enough, they are generally not deported back to Mexico. Instead, they are detained within the United States and they are then sent for processing through local courts. Now, those local courts where they are processing them, there are some reports that there are 3 million people who these courts have a backlog of 3 million people before they can process them. So these people are detained, they're kept within the United States, then the costs of feeding, housing, treating them medically and whatever becomes an American cost. So these people are coming in and being able to find a way to vote. They're likely to, if they're going to vote, to then vote for the party that will allow them to have citizenship in the future. And so they are voting for the Democratic Party. And this is why Joe Biden doesn't want to close down the border. And this is also why there is this relationship to Ukraine and to Israel. Because what has happened is in the two houses in the government in the United States, the Senate and then the House. So in the Senate, a bill has been put together, and this bill now totals about $118 billion, and that's funding is split. About $16 billion is to go to Israel, about $60 billion or thereabouts is to go to Ukraine, about $5 billion is to go to Taiwan and US-friendly Asian nations in the Asian area. But this bill is going to be created by the Senate, but then it has to go down to the House to be voted on and passed. And at the present time, the Republicans control the House, and the Speaker of the House is Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson has come out and stated publicly this week, he's been told of what this bill looks like. And what this bill looks like, in order to give the funding to Ukraine and Israel, Mike Johnson has already said, and the Republicans have said, there needs to be some concrete measures taken to address the border issue. We are not going to, in the House, vote to give the money to Israel and Ukraine unless you, the Democrats, agree that the Biden administration, Biden's in power now, Democratic power, you will fix the border. Now, right now, Joe Biden has the power needed to tighten up the border. The Border Patrol function exists with the American Border Patrol forces, and these are federally controlled. These are under Joe Biden's direct control. However, in the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, each state has its own National Guard. The term National Guard is a little bit misleading. You think that might be a sort of a federal entity, but actually the National Guard operates on a state level, and each state funds its National Guard. So there's Texas National Guard and California National Guard. There is currently a conflict in Texas where the governor there, Greg Abbott, a Republican governor, last September declared an emergency in Texas because the Border Patrol, the federal Border Patrol, were not doing enough to stop these people entering Texas. And it becomes a burden on Texas. As I said, if they need to process them, if they're living in the community, not necessarily generating income, perhaps causing problems. So he declared an emergency and has, in the recent weeks, taken his National Guard and his state border forces and has told them to put out barbed wire across the border, in one area in particular, on the Rio Grande River, and has said to enforce the border. Now, the Border Patrol, who are federal, they have said, well, this is our job. You guys need to get out and pull this wire down. Greg Abbott from Texas has said, we're not pulling the wire down. There has actually been a case which has gone to the US Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has voted 5-4 that the federal Border Patrol agents should be allowed to the border and that the state troopers should remove the wire. Greg Abbott has denied this ruling, said it's not happening. We're still suffering a crisis and you guys aren't doing enough. 25 other Republican-governed states have signed a letter and have joined Governor Abbott in saying that what is happening in Texas is justified and Texas should be able to do that. Ron DeSantis from Florida is actually sending some of his National Guard and some of his state forces to Texas to help support them. So this is why there has been talk of, civil war brewing in the United States, because Texas, talk of Texas seceding from the United States. It's over this conflict between the state and the federal levels. The position that this puts Joe Biden in is that if he doesn't make these concrete measures, and just to be fair, he could now simply say to the Border Patrol, enforce the border. Do not let anyone across unless they are coming through the documented, approved channels. He could do that today. However, what Chuck Schumer, who's the leader of the Senate Democrats, in the bill that he has led to put together, they are saying, well, what we would like to do is if the average number of people entering illegally over the course of a week, let's say, averages more than 5,000 people per day, then we would create a new emergency power for the president, which he could use to then close down the border. And so this sounds like the Democrats, are negotiating on this and giving some ground. But there's a couple of challenges here. One is that no new emergency power is required by Joe Biden to be able to do this. As I say, all he has to do now is say, Border Patrol, federal Border Patrol, enforce the law. Do not let people across. Put the barbed wire up. Keep the barbed wire there. So he could do that now without any need for any new emergency power. This coming out sounds like they're making a move. Oh, we want to give him this new power so that he can do this, because it gives the impression that he can't resolve this issue today, but he can. Also, the bill, as it's structured today, would still allow at least 5,000 people per day to enter via this illegal route before there was any need to actually contact Joe and say, hey, Joe, do you want to close the border down? And of course, it's unlikely that he's going to get reliable, accurate figures, because who's going to be counting all of these numbers on a daily basis and then saying, okay, we need to close this down? So the current bill as it stands would allow 5,000 people a day at a minimum to get through, which over the course of a year is still 1.8 million people. So there would still be nearly 2 million people a year entering via this approach. Now, this is not satisfactory to Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson has gone to X and tweeted, I've seen enough. This bill is even worse than we expected and won't come close to ending the border catastrophe the president has created. As the lead Democrat negotiator proclaimed, under this legislation, the border never closes. If this bill reaches the House, it will be dead on arrival. So, Mike Johnson has said, if you want your money for Ukraine and for Israel, well, we want you to fix the border. And so the Democrat senators have gone away and they've come back with a bill, and Johnson has got wind of this bill and has said, no, it's dead on arrival. So what this means is that for Ukraine, their funding, the $60 billion that they really want to be able to pay their public service workers, to be able to get money for the war effort, to be able to even pay their soldiers and their conscription officers so that they can expand their mobilisation bill to mobilise more people under more draconian rules. They want money to be able to pay those people, because they could fall into a situation where they look to conscript someone under legislation. And part of that legislation is that, yes, if you're in the armed forces, you will be paid. If they don't have money to pay them, then they fall under sort of shaky legal standing as to whether they can keep people conscripted because there's no ability to pay them. So that's why Ukraine really wants this to go ahead, but they are caught. So Joe Biden, the big supporter of them, doesn't want to close the border. He doesn't want to lose these 2 to 4 million likely possible voters per year, which are growing and growing and growing in the United States. But if he doesn't, then Ukraine doesn't get its funding. And this is what the big challenge is for the Ukrainians at the moment, is that they're starting to realise that they are no longer the fair-haired child, that there is a new kid on the block who the US is more interested in. And this we've seen demonstrated yesterday, an announcement, this time not from the Senate, but from a House Appropriations Committee. A bill has been drafted there which would address the Israeli demand for funding. This bill would give $17 billion to Israel. It would not be tied to border funding, but it excludes Ukraine. So what you can see has happened here is that the more important challenge for the United States at the moment is defending Israel in the Middle East. And so now politicians in Washington are starting to carve out other routes where maybe they can unpick the funding for Israel being tied to border security, because they know that's not going to happen. So they're trying to come up with another way to do it. So for Israel, this is good. It looks like they might get another $17 billion of funding. The funding so far is tied because the Republicans, they want to give money to Israel, but they don't want to be giving new money to Israel. So they're tying this one to some changes in terms of funding for the IRS, the Internal Revenue System, the people who will chase you to make sure you're paying your taxes in the United States. They're basically saying, stop funding $17 billion to them and we'll give that money to Israel. So there's still conflict over that. It hasn't been approved yet. There's going to be a vote in the next 48 hours on this one. But what there isn't is any room forward for Ukraine to get its funding. And it's because of this question of the border, and it's because the Democrats lose potential voters if they do tighten it up. Now, there has been other talk over the last week that former president and presidential candidate Donald Trump doesn't want the Republican senators to agree to anything that would enable, and wouldn't want the House Republicans to agree to anything that would enable Joe Biden to make some steps that may appear publicly like what is being suggested. We will reduce the number of people, and if it gets to a certain level, we can give this new power to the president and he can close down the border then, and it sounds like he's doing something. Trump not wanting that to be agreed because Trump wants to be able to campaign against Biden on the topic of this illegal immigration, this undocumented immigration. For Trump, it's a great stick to be able to beat Biden with. So if the Republicans in the House and the Senate agree to something with the Democrats, even if it's really only sort of smoke and mirrors in terms of what Biden might do, it still looks then like they have agreed and they're moving a way forward, and that makes it more difficult for Trump to be able to then say the Democrats are doing nothing on the border. He wants to say that. So there's a lot of pressure at this stage on Mike Johnson to not approve what's coming from the Senate. And it sounds like he won't anyhow. And if you look into what the bill is suggesting, as I say, it doesn't resolve the problem. It perhaps minimises reduces the scale of the problem, Perhaps, no guarantees. And it looks like the Democrats are doing more when really perhaps they're not doing a great deal. But that's, in brief sort of summary, is why the border of the US is so important to Israel and in particular to Ukraine, because it's tied into the funding that they can get to continue their fights.